Matthew chapter 5, verse 14 through 16. It says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." You know, here Jesus says that we as his people are a city on a hill. And he says that it can't be hidden. It's unmistakable. I think that the city on a hill imagery can kind of lose a little bit of its value for us as moderns, because we think, well, what's the big deal about a city on a hill? That's not very impressive. You know, we have engineering, we build cities on hills. It's not that big of a deal. But back in these times, when you traveled, they didn't have convenience stores and lit roads and things that we can very much take for granted, the conveniences of being a modern person. Night travel was dangerous and hard. And so to see a city on a hill was like, oh, hope, finally. You know, you can maybe think about it like a gas station when you really have to use the restroom, or when you're getting ready to run out of gas and you see that gas station sign. That would be some level of the sense of relief that this idea of a city on a hill would put into a person's heart back then. And so that's the idea, is that's what we're meant to be as the church, for people that are weary, for people that life is scary and dangerous and threatening and uncertain and tiring. The church, God's people, is meant to be a city on a hill, hope, a respite. And so that's the image he uses here. And it's interesting because he says, he says, talking about letting your light shine, he says in verse 16, in the same way, in other words, in the same way that a hill or a city on a hill is this great joy to a person, in the same way that a lamp that's lit and put on a stand and lights the whole house. He says in the same way, he's making the connection that this is who we should be as God's kingdom. Let your light shine. Okay. Now, when I first heard this, or when I heard this early on in my faith, every time I heard it, they would say, I always understood it as things like, do really well at your job. And if you do well at your career, then you're letting your light shine. And, God will, people will ask you, why are you so good at your job? Jesus, or athletics, or some kind of accomplishment, academics. Maybe the kid in class that does really well, and man, how do you do so well? Jesus, you know what I mean? And that's kind of how I was always taught this passage. But what's interesting is none of those things are the context of this passage. None of those things are bad. You should do well in school. We should do well in our career. But that's not that's not the context of this passage. The context of this passage is actually the Beatitudes. Blessed are, blessed are, blessed are. That whole section of the Sermon on the Mount. And so the idea that Jesus is saying is, if we take on this kingdom heart of living out the Sermon on the Mount, being poor in spirit and meek and hungering and thirsting for righteousness, mourning, all those different things. If we take on that heart, we become a city on a hill. You know what I mean? And that's the idea of what we want to do here, is we want to embrace that heart. And he says that you let your light shine before others. This is something that should be visible, tangible. It's action. It's things that people should be able to see about us. That this heart is coming out in a way that is visible, that's noticeable to people. And he goes so far as to say that people may see your good deeds. So again, this is actions. This is stuff that should be going down because we have this heart. It says that they will see those good deeds. And because of those good deeds, they're going to glorify your Father in heaven. He makes a direct connection. Jesus makes a direct connection between us having this heart and living a life that reflects that and producing faith in people. That's incredible. That inspires me. Cool. Seeing kingdom hearts lived out is God's plan to produce faith in people's lives. Yeah. That's thrilling. That's how we can be a city on a hill. And that's our goal as we go into this fall, as we engage this study, this series, is we want to be that city on the hill, that our hearts that comes from within and the lives that it produced is so tangible and so visible and real to people that people are moved to faith in God in greater and greater ways because of the lives we live and the actions, the deeds that we do. And so here's what our plan is, okay? Our City on the Hill plan. We have a Sunday teaching plan and a midweek plan. On Sundays, we're going to be studying out the Beatitudes. So each week, we will take one Beatitude and study that Beatitude out. And we're going to flesh it out, and we're going to talk about it in this context of what should a kingdom life that has this heart, what should it be like? What should it look like? And so that's going to be our Sundays. And that's where we talk about kind of the heart of the matter, what's going on inside. Okay. And then on Wednesdays, we are going to be doing a series on loving your neighbor. Like, how do we live this out tangibly? Okay. And so that's how the series is going to work. Oh, that's a great slide. There's our passage. So in talking about loving your neighbor, there are 4 aspects that we're going to talk about. And I'm saying this, I've said it before, I want to reiterate it. You're going to get to the point where you have these things like, oh, if Rich says this one more time, I'm going to go crazy. Perfect, great, go crazy loving people. But we want to talk about 4 tools of loving your neighbor. We're going to talk about active kindness. We've brought that up in a couple of the sermons this past month. That's going to become something what we study in depth. For each of these 4, we're actually going to take 2 midweeks. And what we'll do is we'll do a short kind of study of it at the beginning. And then we're going to break up into our small groups. And we're going to flesh it out. We're going to practice it. We're going to talk about how do we live this out. You know what I mean? Like, we're really going to get very tangible in our small groups right at midweek. Okay, so we're going to do active kindness, and the what that is: active listening, active wondering, and active sharing. Against all these things that when we have this kingdom heart, this is what actively comes out in our life. These are the deeds that we follow through on. Now, most of these ideas come from a book called Irresistible Evangelism that I've read and studied a couple times. And so we're going to be doing short, brief things at the beginning of midweek. If you want more, if you want to read more about it and study more about it, I would highly encourage you grab this resource and study it out. Now, there's another imagery that they use besides the sowing and reaping idea in the book, and that is the idea of golf. Okay. And so the 4 clubs of the spiritual bag. And I love this imagery. If you look at the picture on there, the idea is that at different points on a golf hole, you use different clubs. And if you use the wrong club at any point on a golf hole, you actually wind up playing worse and being less effective. And so the idea is from the box, the tee box there on the hole, that's where active kindness in. That's where, like, I just want to let a lot of people know about how much God loves them. And so active kindness is the way I'm going to do that. Once you get onto the fairway, that's as you begin to build a relationship with somebody, a friendship. You begin that relational outreach aspect. And that's where you get to active listening. And again, we're going to talk about all these. Then you get to active, once you have a relationship where you know the person and all that stuff, then you get into active wondering, which is a really exciting part of this whole series that we're going to be doing about how to draw deeper waters in people. And then lastly, active sharing, which is like the putter. That's like studying the Bible. If we're honest with ourselves, in our way of doing it, if you would, where we share our faith, we invite people to church, and if they come to church, we'll study the Bible with them, that kind of stuff. In our general, what's the word I'm looking? Standard operating procedure, really, we would generally find people right around the green there, maybe the wedge, maybe the putter, like, you know what I mean? Like, but really, that's all of the course that we're covering. And the goal is, as we study these things, to open up much more of how we define outreach, how we engage in outreach, and how we are effective in our outreach, okay? So active kindness, we've talked about this. This is just kind of a brief overview. We define this with demonstrating God's love by offering to do humble acts of service in Christ's name with no strings attached. That's active kindness. And that's where we're going to do giveaways. We're going to serve people. We're going to all those kind of things where we're going to find ways that we are going to become God's love for people in their lives in ridiculously tangible ways. Okay. Again, we're going to do whole midweeks on this. That's all I'm going to say about that for now. Active listening, James 1:19. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen. Okay. One of the things as Christians, when we think of evangelism, we often think of, well, I have something to tell you, which we do. We have good news. But if we don't listen and understand people, then they don't want to hear the message. They're kind of already shut off. And active listening is a way of beginning to understand people at a deeper level. And you see this picture here, and it goes through the different needs of a person and the level of trust where a person, like the level of trust that's required for a person to allow you to connect with them at that level. And so you see it begins with physical needs, then emotional and relational needs, directional needs, and spiritual needs. And so you see, we try to go straight to the spiritual needs, but there's a lot in between there. And so we really have to understand where people are, develop trust, and really understand them. One of the things we'll talk about is spiritual address, understanding where people are spiritually so that we know how to interact with them. We've all received these, right? And what do we do with mail that has that on it? We toss it in the garbage to the current resident. Why? That's not actually to me. That's to, to whoever, they don't care. They just want to get their message across, right? And that's kind of like what it's like to try and reach out to people if we don't actually care and take the time to get to know them. Where when we do, it's more like this. Wow, imagine getting a note like that. I don't even know who Mark Lee is, Mr. and Mrs. Mark Lee, but I bet when they got that, they thought, man, that's awesome looking. I want a letter like that. You know what I mean? And that's the idea, is if we understand who people are and where they come from and what their spiritual address is, we're going to be better equipped to meet their needs and meet them where they currently live and help them in their relationship with God. And so we're going to learn through active listening to discern people's spiritual address. Okay. Then we move into active wandering. Proverbs 25, the purpose of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. And we're going to learn about how to ask questions and engage people in conversation that really gets people thinking about deeper things. And then lastly, active sharing. Are we still going to study the Bible with people? Shoot, yeah. I mean, like it says in Romans 10, how can they, how then can they call on the one they have not believed in? How can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they're sent? As it's written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Certainly, we want to teach people the good news, right? But learning how to do that at the appropriate time and the appropriate way is what we're talking about. And so that is the overall general idea of what we're going to be covering. Again, we're going to do Sundays is going to be all about our hearts, the Beatitudes, and Wednesday is going to be all about our hands, the practicals of how we do this. And it's going to be very interactive. I'm really excited about it. But that's the overall idea of what we're going to be covering for the first part of the fall. And closing out, Matthew chapter 5, verse 8, this is one of the Beatitudes. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Evangelism can feel kind of manipulative, or I've heard people describe it as transactionary, all this kind of stuff. And the non-believing world kind of views Christians that way. Like, you don't care about me. You just want me to get this message across, or you want me to believe what you believe, or whatever. We want to do all of this with a pure heart, with a heart that says, man, if we really embrace a kingdom heart, then we'll see God. We'll see God move in powerful ways and do incredible things. And that's when we'll be a city on a hill, a place where people, they run to because they know, man, that is what I need. Those kind of relationships, that kind of love, that kind of, you know what I mean? And so that's the goal of our series and what we're going to be talking about throughout the fall.